this regard must be to ensure stable energy supply, reduce the risk of long load shedding, and accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources. All of our efforts over the past 13 years have been to fix Eskom. Instead of securing supply of adding additional capacity to the grid, we have already made significant progress in correcting this. The amendment of Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act of 2006 has raised the licensing threshold from 1 megawatt to about 100 megawatts. It has also made it possible for private power generation to sell directly to customers. This will alleviate the risk of power cuts.
Adding infrastructure, that is Eskom, 402 billion rands and impending load shedding. How can Eskom be turned around into a profitable and sustainable state-owned enterprise that can keep the lights on? Well, energy expert Adil Nchabeleng joins me now, as well as Lungile Mashele on Zoom, to talk about this and, of course, more when it comes to the changes or reforms that are required at the power utility. Well, it's good to have you. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you so much.
Yeah, Lungile, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us as well.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
The president on the build-up to the local government election saying the issues at Eskom are serious and complicated. Is that how you would describe what's going on?
Absolutely. In addition to the serious and complicated is the fact that we have a defective leadership that is not following basic standard procedures on how to operate Eskom. So I would agree the issues are serious.
He says, well, that is the CEO. He's not going nowhere because there's really no use in changing leadership at this particular point to the crisis at Eskom, because that will only help to exacerbate, I suppose, the situation, because this is to use his word, a dead horse.
Yeah, absolutely. The CEO was actually correct in defining his role. He finds himself as a jockey who's beating down a horse to its death. So that's what is actually happening. I understand it from that point of view. If he says that he inherited a dead horse and he's unable to revive it, then he's the wrong person on the current, on the stable. So he should have actually been relieved a long time ago, as we had already suggested that Andre de Ruyter is not the best person, given his performance at Nampek, given his performance at Sasol previously, that he doesn't really understand the business of turning around entities, particularly a utility of this nature with the magnitude requirement of work. He's a corporate person coming from a legal background. Wonderful, he can do that work in the legal space. But with regards to corporate turnaround, with regards to ensuring that you can make Eskom a profitable entity, he hasn't had the history of actually turning around any entity towards its profitability. The problems within Eskom are known in a codified way, are known at a technical level, are known at a financial level, and are actually solvable. But it takes a person with an understanding of what needs to be done in the various silos of the business in order to bring about a turnaround. The aspect of energy production, generation, and ensuring that there is electricity available, it's the core most important focus by legislation for Eskom. That should have been Andre's most important focus, as well as understanding of his mandate going into Eskom. But it seems that he's been so confused with his other roles that he feels that he no longer supports what Eskom is about. He supports a new vision, which should be a new company by itself, altogether, which has nothing to do with Eskom at this stage. That Eskom should move away from being a generation of electricity to now moving into the other aspect of promoting into independent power producers to produce electricity. Eskom should buy, and they should actually liberalize the production of energy in the market. So that's a completely different vision.
Is that the project that he's currently busy
He's
with?
pushing that whole entire project, and that is why he says Eskom is a dead horse. He's not going to revive it. He wants to focus on increasing the purchase away from Eskom of electricity and generation of electricity to making sure that Eskom can just become a holdings company, which is they've been doing that. The breaking down, the unbundling of Eskom has been going on behind the scene and without even openness and transparency to the process. So he's the wrong jockey. If he wanted to turn around Eskom and make sure that we at least have the lights, he would have been doing it by now, and there would be energy availability factor of about 70%, and there would be no load shedding in South Africa. And if he moves it higher to 80%, he will be a performing star. And his revenue of Eskom's will increase, rather than dropping. Right now, he's actually at almost 7% drop in terms of revenue.
Right.
At the same time, he's been given really what we call the regulatory control account, which is RCA, allowance of over 205 billion, which is already coming into the company. Yet he's not focusing on core elements of what Eskom should be doing. So he's a wrong jockey. We accept that. We're not disputing with him on that basis. Yeah. But we're saying on the fundamentals. I look at the financials. Annual financial statements spell it very clearly, and they are full of a whole lot of holes.
We'll come to that in a moment. Lungile, let's bring you in here. Is this a dead horse? And other challenges at Eskom of leadership or of operations with some of the staff not cooperating with the tendencies of, I don't know, others want to use a strong word, of sabotaging the efforts of the CEO?
I will go as far as saying there is no sabotage at Eskom. Eskom is in a very big leadership crisis. You will recall that this is an electricity services company. It is an engineering company. And even if you look at all of our fields, whether you're in the STEM medical fields, it's very difficult for an outsider to come in. And this is why even when former chief executives left, there was always that promise and that thing that said, please bring in somebody who's got knowledge of the electricity system. Andre comes in with a legal background. He's worked where, he's worked business. He's not a turnaround person. He's not an engineer. He is not an energy person at all. It was always going to be harder for him to come in. And more importantly, to get the buy-in of senior Eskom engineers to do what has to be done. So it's not about sabotage. It's just if the leadership at the top is not guiding you. And it's very telling that he would use the words of flogging dead, horses, because is he referring to the entity itself and the people that work there, which is very troublesome, because again, it goes back to my point that if your leader is calling you a dead horse, there's not much that you're going to do either. If he's referring to the assets themselves and to the power plants, this is also very telling in light of what the Minister of Finance said, that they are looking at selling some of Eskom's assets. So if the CEO is busy going around telling everybody about dead horses, when it's time to sell these assets, will they go at fair value or not?
Was reading an article earlier on around Kusile, and they're talking that there are still leaks there. After billions and billions have been spent on this thing, water leaks, coal leaks, all sorts of leaks that are going on in that particular build. What is the problem?
There are numerous issues, and Kusile Medupi, the key issues there were the design challenges, okay? What they've built there is not necessarily fit for purpose, so this is why now they're trying to retrofit, to redesign, and to fix as best as they possibly can. And this then lends itself to the maintenance portion, because you will recall that as units commissioned, they are handed over to generation and they're no longer part of group capital. So they now have to be maintained with Eskom's normal operations maintenance budget. So one has to ask themselves that perhaps Medupi Kusile getting more preference from the O&M budget than other plants that perhaps should be prioritized. So you're basically running down all of your assets or your assets, trying to basically save two. And I mean, ultimately, it's that engineering sublime again, where you want to be a hero and you want that in your tenure, Medupi Kusile should be fully commissioned and you look like a hero. But at what expense to the entire fleet? At what expense to operations and maintenance that has to occur as per philosophy on the other plants?
All right, we'll talk to that issue then in a moment. Let's talk to, in fact, let's get into it, the issue of the other fleets. Right? The president saying, well, look, they are old. I think he says some of them are 60 years old, those generators. And that's part of the challenge that we know we need to deal with. He says the issue of unpaid bills is another issue. And then, of course, dealing with illegal connections as well. I mean, is Andre Director able to deal with these issues, or is it something that he cannot sort out?
I think from the point where he took off, I mean, from 2017, Eskom was profitable and was actually revenue increased during that period. It was the highest at the time. Since he took over, I think 2020, there was a massive revenue drop and decline in respect as well with regards to the sales drop. Revenue went down, the sales went down. There was no more budget with regards to actually allocating enough allocation of budget towards the repair and maintenance program.
Yeah. Why? What happened?
Because they are prioritizing other things. They are doing all other, sort of shifting around the budgets in other areas rather than focusing it on maintenance as well as upkeep of power plants. The president is right when he says, look, there's been problems with regards to revenue recovery. Why are there revenue recovery in municipalities when municipalities by de facto are actually government? Why would government not pay its own other agent supplier its own required money? Why don't you just go direct and say, these municipalities are defecting, the responsibility of municipalities finally lies at the door of Treasury. Treasury should have removed that fund and actually prioritized it to Eskom. So some of the things happening in there is purely management issues and mismanagement. If there was a team prioritizing, right now there is no team. There is 2 teams, by the way, that are working. One is looking at the political team, that is advisory within Eskom. The other one that is looking at the aspect of actually recovering on accounts. They have been working and there has not been any progress, to a point where they've even been engaging with, for instance, Soweto. They've had to write down about 8.5 billion of money that was actually, sort of overbilled in a way, and under somewhere there was no service of delivery, and they overbilled on that side of it. So there are issues that are resolvable, but there was no interest. At some point, I think in 2018-19, when we started speaking very strong and boldly about the issue of municipal revenue and the fact that there is no recovery from municipal income into Eskom, there was something done urgently at the point. I think it was still Khadebe, the CEO. Monies were actually agreed. There were court cases that happened. There were monies that were actually, sort of recovered. But then the process stopped after Andre took over. There was no more sort of gravitation and focus. People of Soweto, in terms of payment, people of Alexander, they've all agreed that we want to pay. Give us a scheme on how to pay, install for us prepaid meterage, ensure that we can be independent and we can pay. There's never been installation. There's no installation at any point in the country.
They tell you that
so there's no recovery.
Teams are being attacked. They're going to go in with security.
No. There's some agreements that have been made with actually the Soweto crisis committees on energy and everything, whereby they work with regards to installing these meters. They work with councillors and everything. This is the governing ruling party that has the power in the province, that has the power nationally. Why would they have province issues where they could just go in and then say, we're installing this meterage, instead of doing illegal connection, we make sure that we give you your current stipend, because there is a grant that is given on the meterage. And then thereafter they pay for the extra utilization. That is a process of engagement. That has not been happening.
What is the agreed thing? I mean, some of the folks that we've spoken to are saying they want a 200 rands flat rate.
If they agree with it and the consumption doesn't exceed 200 rands flat rate,
it does, though.
So if the consumption, for instance, has there been a study actually done to ensure that they understand what is the consumption of each household? Eskom hasn't conducted that study. They don't even know what's consumed at the household level. Right. So they should have said, listen, based on our information,
I agree with
financials.
Even the indigent program, there is no study that I know of that has been done to determine actually how much does a household need as far as electricity is concerned, in of course, relation to the one that they are offering at this particular
Correct. Remember on Newzroom, we once did a show where we spoke about the electricity grant program, which is supposed to be a legal process that is based on legislation, that is actually a universal thing in South Africa. Electricity is offered on a grant to indigent households wherever there is a need for them and they cannot afford it. It's similar to water. That grant, most of the municipalities don't implement it, and they actually give it away on prepaid utility resellers, people who are wholesaling prepaid electricity. They are taking it and they are not passing it to the consumer. So you have bigger problems on some of these issues. People who are retailing the prepaid vouchers are actually taking and robbing and defrauding customers by not passing to them the required grant benefit that they are supposed to receive for a certain amount of kilowatt hours that is actually consumed by households. So these are issues that are solvable. As long as there's a team and the people are focused, it can be resolved and it can be challenge driven. If they are saying they can provide 200, and Eskom says, but guys, you're consuming 100, you're consuming 1,000 rand, there should be a negotiation to say where we can carry you on the grant level, and from here onwards it should be your responsibility. If you're over consuming 1,000 rand, we cannot help you. We will give you your 200 rand, which is a grant, or 300 rand, whatever the amount of grant is. The rest, you have to foot on the bill and ensure. But I've never seen a single program running. With regards to the implementation of meterage across the country.
I'm going to come back to that. Let me take a break. We'll come back to the implementation of meterage in a moment. Adil Nchabeleng and Lungile Mashele with us tonight at the operational challenges at the power utility and what reforms need to be put in place next.
State-owned companies are intended to be important as enablers of economic development. Many SOEs, however, have been badly managed and have failed to deliver. In many instances, they've also been devastated by state capture, making them increasingly reliant on government. Since 2013, for instance, government has directed more than 290 billion rand to bail out state-owned companies at the expense of important social expenditure. Going forward, the restructuring of state-owned companies, informed by an assessment of their strategic relevance, is a priority. In this medium-term budget policy statement, no additional funding is provided for state-owned companies. The exception is to this is where guarantees have been called by creditors and conditions have been met by the OEC in question within the context of their strategic importance.
Tough love, that's what the minister calls it. A pill that is being served to SOEs, including Eskom. Will you be able to sustain that, Lungile, at Eskom, particularly with the kind of debt that that utility is dealing with? And he says, well, unless guarantees are now due, maybe we'll step in. But quite honestly, we're not going to give them a cent.
So you recall that Eskom has about debt of about 450 billion rand. 350 of that is guaranteed by the state. And I hear this sentiment of that we can step in. And quite frankly, I don't even think government has that kind of money anywhere in their coffers. And this is why perhaps there's this talk about selling of assets. Eskom is in a precarious situation operationally and financially, and we were well aware of this. And for me, listening to the minister is a bit strange because he's putting the blame squarely on the SOEs themselves, when in Eskom's case, we need to remember how we got here. And it was because of the ruling party and the government is how we got here. Delayed decisions, wrong procurement, corruption. It was meddling in SOE affairs, and the SOEs eventually then started running badly. Eskom for the longest amount of time was a top performing company, was one of the more enviable utilities globally, and they basically run it to the ground. And now they're saying that by the way, we actually don't have the money and nor do you, so we might have to sell like your assets. And nowhere in this is there any sense or hint of irony of how we got here. We have not had electricity in this country for 14 years. We've had to share electricity amongst ourselves because of decisions made by the governing party. Yes, there is no money to support Eskom, but through tariffs, through the regulatory clearing account, through tariff increases that they have been allowing, through the government bailout also of 23 billion rand a year. Yes, they've only received about 10 billion of that, but there are many mechanisms that are in place, but also it needs to be matched with efficiency from the utility side as well. And this burning of diesel is also not helping because the primary energy costs are shooting through the roof as well.
Yeah, primary energy costs is what you wanted to talk about. You're saying those books are shocking. At some point, we were apparently making headway as far as the debt is concerned. Where did the wheels follow?
With regards to the issue of debt, remember the primary debt right now, the most important debt was Kusile Medupi build, which attracted over 450 billion. It's been reduced to about below 400 billion now. They're looking at about 380 billion or so. So in that whole scheme of it is, one, government was involved at procurement, Treasury was involved from day one, right up to the point of it. They delayed, they did cost overruns, they allowed the two builders, Hitachi and Mitsubishi, to actually create the current mess. They even messed up their spec. They allocated one company a wrong spec, which is not their competency, and then gave the other one another spec, which was not their competency. And that's where the problems happened. Each was building in areas that they didn't have much experience and know-how in terms of building turbines, and the other one was the towers.
What is that? Was this pure political meddling?
It was meddling, and then a last-minute mess-up on how they allocated that tender. Because it was a fast tender, they had no competition, and they were just saying, okay, fine, you take this or whatever, and then you take this, and then the project started as soon as possible. And on top of them, they gave them a blank check. You know, there was no sticking to budget, there was no sticking to what was the proposal in terms of that, and it was just a scope over creep. I mean, for 10 years, this thing was just running uninhibited. You know, you could build, you have people who were supplying plant, will tell you equipment, components, and everything that we have Eskom's components sitting with us here for 2 years, and every time they just tell you, no, wait about it, don't worry, and then they keep on charging them, for instance, storage, they keep on charging maintenance and all of those things. So it was a mess on its own, you know, but it was done strategically because there were certain beneficiaries who made lots of fortune and income out of it. But really this ball falls squarely on the contractors. In any mega build like this one, engineering and technical component build falls on any level, goes towards the builder who must take the responsibility. By now, we should be recalling on all the build overruns and all the faults that happened. We should be recalling all the money from the current installers and the builders. But Mitsubishi and Hitachi has not been taken to
Eskom, and you're the chair right now. What would you be saying? Because Andre Director says, well, I serve at the behest of the board, and if there's anyone who will tell me to step down, it would have to be that board.
Yeah, but the board is governed by the interest of the people. The people have called already, the unions, civil society, political parties, people from parliament. There are people within the ruling party who are not happy with him and are dissatisfied. So I don't know what he talks about when he says a board which is appointed by the people from a state point of view. So we mustn't be confused by rhetoric that comes out of people like Andre Director saying, I'm stubborn enough to say. The only problem I've found is that he's a white man that most black people are afraid to confront and tell him to get off and really leave the business of Eskom to people who know what to do, particularly technically. So black people are afraid of him because he's white. If it was me in that position where I was sitting on that board, I would have fired Andre Reuters first time. I would not even waste my time. If a report comes in like this, as I'm looking at it and it tells me all of these problems and what has been happening financially, you know, operationally, technically, it has been happening on the human resources level. I mean, the key performance indicators are very clear. Focuses on safety, improvement of operations plant, primary energy optimization, delivery of capital expansion, legal separation, ensuring of financial sustainability, socio-economic impact, reducing economic environmental footprint, ensuring industrialization and localization. This guy on corporate social investment, industrialization and localization, all of the indicators are negative. It's all red. Go and see it for yourself. I'm not making up any scary story here. It's all red, and it shows you that there's been a decline on various elements of those key performance indicators.
Why is there no action? Why are you saying it's the most...
They fear Andre because he's white.
What is his power?
Purely is that.
Color.
And then he's got people, for instance, the Minister of Public Enterprise protects him, completely so. So if you can't go... You can't remove him because Praveen somehow has a liking towards him. There is a problem in the country. So the issue is really at the leadership level. Andre, if he was black, in any given SOE by now he would have been fired because of the color aspect of it.
What would you do to turn this ailing power utility around to profitability?
First thing, you must make sure that you increase the energy availability factor.
Yeah.
Get back to the balls and nuts.
With the current fleet, what would you do?
Yeah, improve it. Make sure that you go and bring back the plants that are currently being actually mothballed. They are putting them into disuse. Some of them are shutting down. They are leaving units actually maintained and refurbished and everything. Currently, Eskom has got the highest levels of unplanned breakdowns. You know what does unplanned breakdown mean? You left a car and you just let it run. You took a generator and you let it run without actually removing the components after, say, 6 months or 12 period, whatever it is what is required. They just let those things run and not maintain them. So when they start breaking down and they become overly used and they break down, it becomes unplanned. Planned is when they go in and saying, we're going to be doing this refurbishment, maintenance, we're going to be doing operational, checks on those things, we're going to make sure that we repair whatever needs to be done.
Yeah.
That is the smallest problem in Eskom right now, is planned maintenance. The highest problem is unplanned.
Is the ability to schedule that so that it doesn't affect productivity of the country?
It was done before. You can hate Brian and Coco as much as you like and bring about every accusation. They did it in turning around Eskom, and they did it amazingly well. For 3 years, South Africa didn't have electricity challenges. They brought up the energy availability factor and ensured that we had lights. So it's not a miracle or a science feat. It is just a process. They adhered to the process, they adhered to the technical element of it, they made sure that the science worked, they made sure that there was enough support in terms of the teams that are doing the turning around, and especially at the technical level. The engineers were given the tools, the machinery, the technology, the components, and the budget that was required. And they were given the manpower support. And they were rewarded as well, and actually given courage to say, go do it and make sure. Because that's the core of Eskom. According to legislation, it says, make sure you produce electricity at the most cost-effective, cheapest rate ever available. Right now, Eskom's actually rate of production. What with the
allegations that those guys that were there left because of the shenanigans that were going on at Eskom?
Oh, no, it was very interesting. They challenged one of the biggest coal supplier in the world. One guy went against one guy from Glencoe point of view. This is what we had. Ivo Glassenberg was upset with Transnet at the time when they were negotiating the haulage of coal. It came into that same issue, and beef came into Eskom, and from Eskom, when his contracts were actually brought into question, he then instituted a process by what we saw now that ended up in ensuring that some people didn't exist in Eskom afterwards. So it was a material interest. So we're looking at a situation whereby there is a lot of interference. We talk about corporate capture, state capture. There's a lot of levers that are in South Africa's economy, in South Africa's procurement program, that there has been a lot of influence on. Brian and Coco probably were to such brazen, to such levels where they actually disturbed some people in their fixed interest. I would definitely be upset if you came in, I have a 40-year contract on an evergreen coal agreement, and you tell me you're going to renegotiate with me, when I know I have a 40-year where I'm just going to be enjoying a price increase, annual increase, and I can price as much whatever I want, and nobody will question me. But when those two did that, it became a problem because they questioned the fundamentals and they negotiated based on the book. Currently, NERSA tells you what to do in terms of ensuring that your rate of procurement of coal is at what level. But if you look at what Eskom is paying against what NERSA says, it's a completely two things. They overpay against what NERSA subscribes for payment. So
I want you to reveal that. Give me those details when we come back from the break. Adil Nchabeleng, Lungile Mashele staying with us tonight here on In Focus. Of course, they are giving us what needs to happen to the power utility to turn it around and prevent load shedding, which of course we saw in the last couple of weeks, rolling blackouts continuously. Nchabeleng as well as Lungile Mashele outlining for us some of the issues at the ailing power utility. So if you are in that board, Lungile, today and you are chairing it, what would you want to see happen? Of course, looking at the red robot that Adil has been showing us here as far as the financials are concerned and key performance indicators that have not been hit?
So the very first thing, that board I do not think has anybody of technical capability. And this is why Andre can come and say anything and nobody's going to question him. And Andre himself is not a technical Eskom person. So this is why it's easy for anybody to come and say anything to him. And the whole leadership structure is basically hoodwinked. So I'd basically start with having competent people in the board that can hold Andre to account and the other group executives as well. Some of the things that I'd be calling for are operational stability. I'd be calling for operations maintenance, wanting to see the reliability maintenance plan. It's unfathomable that in the last 22 months since they started the philosophy maintenance plan, only 7 out of 80 units have been have undergone that process. It means we're still very, very far from where they have to be. So holding them to account for that, looking at decommissioning plants, especially 3 plants that are holding Eskom back. Because if you just take away those 3 plants, and I forgot their names now, but basically Eskom's EAF is then above 70%. So there are 3 plants that are basically crippling them in that aspect. And it's like throwing money down the drain ultimately, when these plants, according to the Integrated Resource Plan of 2010, had to be decommissioned in 2017 already. Then I would look at procuring firm capacity. You know, it's an interesting thing to see every night when Sekonati does the reports, and you'll see that in the renewable capacity, we have about 6,800 megawatts installed out, average. But on any given evening, we have anything between 800 to 1,500 megawatts available. Now, this is not the fault of the renewable side, because ultimately Medupi and Kusile were supposed to have been built by now and commissioned. So we could have done with the small renewables that we get, but unfortunately it is messing us up now, as we need firm capacity, anything between 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts. So that's what I'd be focusing on. Another thing that I would definitely look at, this 100 megawatt cap that allows private entities to actually procure their own electricity, helping them to fast track that, because what that would mean is that if we can get 2,500 megawatts from them alone, Eskom does then not have to burn diesel, and automatically we then have returned to profitability almost at the end of the month if we don't have to burn diesel. And so those are some of the interventions that I'd be looking at as the board chair and monitoring them against that.
So I was told in one of the conversations with some of the experts that to bring that particular process, the 100 megawatts from private companies to book, it's a long process. It's not something that you can really speed up. I mean, if you do it in 6 months, you're lucky, but it probably would take a little bit longer than that.
No.
Okay,
so
you're saying no?
Yes, so you're basically looking at anything from 18 to about 36 months. And I say 18 for the projects that were already on their way and were already trying to apply for like a license, but the process was just long. So for the projects that have their feasibilities and they have their authorizations from Civil Aviation Authority or their basic EIAs, those projects within 18 months they can be built and they can be available. Then of course those who are only starting now, like the announcements that we've heard in the last week from SAB, Sibanye Stillwater, that's only going to be, let's say, in the next 24 to 36 months. So it's not an immediate solution, unfortunately. So this is why we were then counting on the risk mitigation IPP program, which was supposed to have reached financial close a couple of months ago. It was extended to the end of September, and which was not met as well. And it's now clouded in conspiracies and in alleged fraud. And it's basically going to push it out, and we might not even achieve what was meant to have been achieved through the risk mitigation IPP program.
Why is that not reaching financial close? I mean, one of the issues is, of course, is around the power ships.
Yeah, it was the gas thing, the power ships. There's an opposition by the renewables against gas, particularly being coal power, which they said that 1,200 megawatts, which is the risk mitigation independent power producers program. That's one thing. I mean, that risk mitigation is a wonderful program. The only challenge is the renewables don't want to see Car Power starts its financial close process and actually ensure that it can bring in electricity into the grid. They have a whole opposition to saying anything that is not solar or wind should not exist in this particular space. And the problem with the current scenario is wind, first of all, is not firm and is not base load capacity, so it's not going to pass the test in this case. The only thing that will be doing, they have a mix of it, which is wind, they have a hybrid of solar, they have a hybrid of generation in terms of diesel, and then the others are doing the gas supplement to it. At the end of the day, that program will only happen if there's a financial close. There is an opposition right now towards the gas program because they said it's meddled with corruption and everything. It hasn't been tested, as you know, in South Africa. As long as I can accuse you, you're already wrong until everything else is finalized. So they can hold up this whole process as much as possible to make sure it never happens, because they don't want gas to be actually a supplier, and Car Power is not allowed to go forward into the financial close. So that is a political issue, and that is a lobbying issue. And the lobby that is very strong right now is the green lobby, which is the renewables lobby, that is pushing against and actually using Minister Mantashe now as their sort of sparring partner now, and beating him to bits on this whole thing and accusing him of corruption and everything. But nothing has been proven so far. So it's one of those things that we deal with in South Africa. They just allege things. And the other thing is they hate the fact that Mantashe has gone out strong in support of the coal industrialization process, the continuation of utilization of coal, and then bringing in gas as well as an alternative to the situation.
Will that position jeopardize the 154 billion or 134 billion?
131 from
131 billion
from the
COP26. And what is that?
No, it's not related at all. Yeah. So that whole position was the president's pledge to say South Africa will move away from coal. That's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen in South Africa, particularly given the scenario of our current Eskom-based fleet, which is coal-based, 80% plus is coal-based. And the other part of it is not feasible. I mean, the president himself comes from companies by himself that owns coal export as well as coal supply to Eskom, as we're talking about. So if you're saying you're phasing out coal, you're going to stop the utilization of coal by 2030, hopefully. What is the alternative to Kusile, Midupi, and all of them? I mean, some of these things are not thought out. The other thing is coal is our bedrock of South Africa's economy. The industrialization of South Africa, Van der Bijl Park itself, the Van der Bijl whole project of bringing about Eskom, Van der Bijl Park, of ensuring that there was the mines in Mpumalanga, there was the coal power plants and everything all linked up to this whole thing, industrialization, the aspect of fertilizer manufacturing in South Africa, steel manufacturing, the element of industrialization came about coal. So we should understand the fundamentals. It might be a beautiful wish to say we must go green, which we all want. I live a green life personally. I have, utilities that I use that are all green. Yeah. But I know the limitation and I know the cost to it. So there are certain fundamentals that are not applicable in the current scenario we're in. And on top of it, you cannot go to Saudi Arabia and you tell the Saudis that they must stop production of oil because of the fact that you have some kind of an inclination to the fact that you don't like oil. The same is told about in South Africa. We must stop our free, God-given right and resource that can be made clean with clean coal, with clean processing of extracting energy and coal,
lobby groups will come and argue with that.
And make it clean coal into hell energy, including the power plants.
To do anything clean with coal.
So we are held ransom by green lobby groups in South Africa, whereas the majority of South Africans want to use their own coal and make it clean and make it green and make sure the power plants are retrofitted with clean energy based.
Let's talk then about this 131 billion of a just transition.
Yes.
Yeah. What is that going to do for Eskom?
It's going to cripple the economy of South Africa. It's going to destroy the livelihoods of people. It's going to bring about the most harshest economic difficulty ever seen in South Africa, because we are going to substitute coal with a lot of expansion of debt in the South African economy, buying imported energy from everything, solar, wind, gas, and everything else that we don't have in South Africa. We're going to substitute. Whereas coal is available, it's cheap, it's already mined. Government just gives you a license to go and extract it from the ground, which is already there, and they buy it at the market price. Right now, when you substitute it and you go over and you actually increase the procurement and the importation of energy in South Africa through this whole program of the COP26, of bringing in subsidies, grants, as well as the debt structures, to instruments to make sure that you can build these power fleets that they are talking about that are all green and are renewable and are not based on the South African production, you're going to cripple the South African economy. You're going to cripple the mining industry. You're going to cripple the production, the retail sector. It's a whole cascading effect, and it's going to have disastrous effects. Unfortunately, it's a wonderful pipe dream. No country in the world, including China, Russia, including America, including South America, none of them are dependent on renewables on any scale in order to power and produce electricity. The only one that is running a most successful renewable program, guess which one? France, which is supporting Germany with electricity, and Germany is buying from France. What energy are they using? They're using nuclear. 70–80% of their fleet on power generation is all based on nuclear. So in South Africa, coal is forbidden today, according to the new agreement made in COP26. It's a forbidden word, it's a forbidden industry to go into, but certain people are given the right to still export it through Richards Bay Coal Terminal, they are given the right to make sure that they can still make lots of money out of coal. They are not stopped immediately. The second part of it is, in the mining sector, part of it, it's forbidden to now mine and even be funded for mining of coal, what you call a process, and even supplying, which means we're killing the new entrepreneurs and new junior miners who are black, who are already holding license in coal licenses, who are supposed to be coming into the play on ensuring that coal in South Africa can be beneficiated. We can create the steel. We cannot rely on imported steel, which mainly comes from the Asian countries in South Africa. And we can be actually independent on our steel and energy generation. Yeah. Those two things. Nuclear, again, is the forbidden industry to go into because they don't want nuclear. Yet we are a nuclear producing. From the, what do you call it, the nuclear power itself, the powder, we cannot produce that in South Africa. We cannot beneficiate it. We cannot build out of it. So what are we left with as a people to literally live on?
That's another conversation for another day around, for example, the safety of those plants and so on and so forth. But this is where we're going to leave it for today. Quick one from both of you. I think I have about 30 seconds. I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but your prediction of when we'll get that all-important press release that power generation is under strain?
With Eskom, anytime. It does not matter the weather, the temperature, the day, whether it's evening, weekend, absolutely anytime.
So we can still expect it anytime from now. There is no stability in our system at this particular point?
They can bring about stability within 6 months. They don't want to do it, and they don't want to bring up the performance of power plants, and they don't want to do the maintenance program that's required. That's all. Load shedding is solvable. It's not actually a future problem. It is a past problem if they could do fundamentals of management, technical upkeep, and ensuring that the plants are working and are working effectively. I would do that and then put South Africans in a comfort zone where there is no load shedding. And then they can work up a new program of building brand new power stations in anything. Renewable, solar, wind, you can build nuclear, you can build coal, you can build whatever you want to build. But solve the current problem, which is currently giving us the crisis that is making us all South Africans uncomfortable, and that is losing us a lot of money. Ordinary entrepreneurs, ordinary people today are losing money. People who are dependent on that 10,000 rents, when that's the shevo, when that meat that sits in the fridge that runs their little tuck shop and everything goes rotten because Eskom cannot supply electricity for the day, they lose that income. You and I cannot feel it because it's 10,000 rents. Yeah. But to that ordinary person who 10,000 rent makes that difference in that life for that month, makes everything, feels the impact of it. So let's fix the basics now, which are fixable. The rest, let's plan for the future properly. IRP is there, that gives us a guideline to follow, and all the technologies are welcome.
Let's leave it there for now. Appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming through. Adil Nchabeleng and Lungile Mashele there, helping us in that conversation with the Eskom challenges. We continue.